The hall smelled like recycled air and old decisions. ARA had been sitting in the same chair, at the same table, in the same left-wing corner of the Hall of Concord for 11 years. The table was third tier. There was a structural column 2 meters to her right that blocked her view of the main floor if she sat straight. She had learned to lean. She had been leaning for 11 years. The session started at the 9th bell, same as always. 300 delegates from 41 species filled the curved rows of the hall. Some had 4 arms. Some had no eyes. Some communicated through vibration patterns that the translation matrix turned into flat, polite sentences. They all wore their ceremonial sashes. They all knew their assigned seats. Nobody sat behind a column except the humans. Archdiplomat Varric opened the session. He was tall, pale grey, and moved the way very old things move, like he had all the time that had ever existed and was in no hurry to spend it. He had been the council's senior voice for longer than ARA had been alive. He spoke for 20 minutes before saying anything. He congratulated 3 species on their trade agreements. He acknowledged the retirement of a long-serving delegate from the Druin bloc. He read 2 procedural updates that could have been written in 1 sentence each but were given 4 paragraphs instead. His voice never changed pitch. It was the voice of an institution talking to itself. Nari sat to ARA's left. She was 29, sharp-faced, and her jaw had been tight since they walked in. She had grown up on a colony world. She knew what it looked like when people talked past you. She was looking at Varric the way you look at a wall you've decided to walk through. Wu Jin stood at the back of the hall near the exit. He always stood. He had sat in a council chamber exactly once, during his first session 6 years ago, and had not done it since. Standing let him see the whole room. He preferred to see the whole room. The petition came up 40 minutes in. Humanity's formal request for colonial defense reclassification, filed 18 months ago, refiled 4 times, supported by 70 pages of incident documentation and 112 witness accounts from 7 different colony systems, was read aloud by a junior clerk in 11 seconds. Then Varric noted that the review committee had not yet completed its assessment. He suggested it be tabled pending the committee's final report. He moved on before anyone responded. 43rd tabling. Nari's pen hit the table. Not loud. But it hit. ARA did not look at her. ARA was looking at the statement in front of her. 1 page. 1 paragraph. 11 words, printed in the council's official font, on the council's official stationery, filed with the council's official record office at 6 a.m. that morning. Fully legal. Perfectly procedural. The kind of document the council's own law had made possible 600 years ago and nobody had ever used because nobody had ever needed to. She had written it the night the colony on Kepler's Reach stopped transmitting. The distress call had come in during the council's midday recess. The council had a standing policy. Emergency sessions could be called during recess, but required a 3-delegate co-signature and a 20-minute notification window. By the time the notification window closed, the signal from Kepler's Reach was gone. The council had resumed its session after lunch. The Kepler's Reach petition had been filed the following week. It was currently in its 7th month of review. ARA did not think about that right now. She thought about the weight of the pen in her hand. She thought about how it felt to pick it up. Then she put it down without uncapping it. She stood up. The hall did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet in sections, like a fire going out row by row. She read the statement into the open microphone. Her voice was level. She did not look up from the page. 11 words, read at normal speed, which took approximately 4 seconds. She placed the statement face up on the table. She capped the pen. She put it in her jacket pocket. She walked out. Nari was already standing. Wu Jin was already at the door. The hall did not erupt. Eruptions require something to combust. There was nothing to combust. There was only the specific, stunned silence of 300 delegates watching a thing happen that was not supposed to be possible. Not because it was illegal, but because it had simply never been done. It had never been done because everyone assumed it never would be done. Because everyone assumed humanity needed the council more than the council needed humanity. Everyone had assumed this for 40 years and nobody had ever checked if it was true. Varric stood at his podium. He did not speak for 7 seconds. In 20 years of watching him, ARA had never seen him take more than 2. The statement lay on the table. Face up. White paper. Black ink. 11 words in the council's official font. Several delegates leaned toward each other. Some spoke in low tones. One of the Drauvian block members turned in his seat to look at the door ARA had walked through, as though she might come back. She did not come back. Delegate Soren sat in the 5th row, junior attaché section, pressed flat against his seat. He was young for a Thalari, which still meant he was older than most human civilizations. He had a habit of being very still when he was thinking hard. He was very still now. He looked at the statement on the table. He did not pick it up. He had read the document that morning, when it was filed with the record office. He had read it twice. He had understood it on the second reading. He had spent the rest of the morning hoping he was wrong. He was not wrong. The session continued. It had to. 41 species had schedules. Varric recovered his voice and moved to the next item on the agenda. The words came out smooth and practiced and completely hollow, because Varric was an institution and institutions do not stop moving. They just keep moving while the ground shifts under them. The human table sat empty. The statement lay there through the rest of the session, untouched, face up, in a hall that could not stop looking at it and could not bring itself to read it out loud. Soren did not look at it again. He already knew what it cost. Nobody declared war. That was the part that kept breaking Varric's staff analyst. Wars had rules. Wars had a shape. There were established protocols for wars, emergency sessions, sanction frameworks, fleet monitoring systems that had been running for 2 centuries without needing to be used seriously. The Council knew what to do with a species that was angry. It had done it before. It did not know what to do with a species that was simply no longer there. On the first day, the recall notices went out from Earth's administrative office. Standard language. Professionally worded. Every human ambassador across Council space was formally recalled for internal review. Fully legal. The kind of thing species did during times of political transition. The Council's response office flagged it, filed it, and sent a standard acknowledgement. On the second day, 12 human trade liaisons stationed aboard Council platforms filed notice of contract completion. Their contracts, when checked, had all expired within the last 60 days. Nobody had noticed because contract renewals were automatic and had been automatic for so long that nobody checked them anymore. The liaisons packed their things. They were pleasant about it. They shook hands and left forwarding addresses for their personal mail. On the third day, the Council's morning communications log showed 47 unanswered messages to various human diplomatic channels. The response rate from human officers dropped to 0 before noon. By the end of the week, 312 human personnel had departed Council space through normal administrative processes. No drama. No press statements. No door slammed. The paperwork was all in order. Wu Jin had spent 8 months making sure it was all in order. His name appeared on none of it. The Council filed a diplomatic rupture injunction on day 9. It was a legal instrument so old that the clerk who processed it had to pull the original code from an archive subsection that had not been accessed in over a century. It had been written for warring civilizations. It had been written for species that were actively trying to destroy each other. It required the named party to appear before the Council within 30 days for formal mediation proceedings. ARA received the filing notification. She read it. She did not reply. On day 14, the translation matrix for Sector 7 trade arbitration began running on its backup cache. The primary system had required a weekly maintenance cycle. The maintenance cycle had been performed by a human-coded automated system that ran off a server cluster on Platform 9. The human technicians who maintained Platform 9's server cluster had filed their 2-week notices on day 2. The backup cache could handle basic functions for approximately 3 weeks before degrading. Nobody on the Council's technical staff had known the primary system was human-maintained because it had always been human-maintained and had never broken down and therefore had never needed to be explained to anyone. Grand Curator Yors found out on day 16, when his deputy handed him a technical report with a highlighted section at the bottom. Yors was the head of the Council's resource arbitration chamber. He was very good at his job, which meant he was very good at knowing which numbers to not look at too closely. There was a dependency audit his office had been updating quarterly for 4 years. It showed what Council infrastructure relied on external contracted labor, which species, which systems, which platforms. He had flagged it internally 3 years ago as a document requiring policy review. Nobody had scheduled the review. It kept getting pushed. He had stopped pushing. He pulled the audit now. He read it in his office with the door closed. It took 2 hours. When he was done, He sat for a while. Then he poured himself a drink, a dark, thick liquid his species used for occasions that required something stronger than water and weaker than decisions, and he did not finish it. The audit covered 31 human-staffed medical stations treating non-human patients across council space. Jump lane maintenance contracts for 17 active corridors, all of which had been offered for open bid 4 decades ago and only humans had submitted pricing on. Translation matrix architecture for 4 of the council's 7 primary arbitration sectors, not just Sector 7. Emergency response relay systems for 2 border platforms. The nutritional synthesis calibration for 6 non-human species in the outer colonies, which required a specific chemical process that humans had stumbled into by accident 40 years ago and quietly been running since. None of these things were on the main session agenda. They had never been on the main session agenda. They were in the footnotes. They were in the operational annexes. They were the kind of work that got done so reliably that the council had simply stopped knowing it was being done at all. Yors closed the audit. He did not share it with the full council. On day 22, a Druin medical transport misrouted through a jump corridor running on cached navigation data. The corridor's active update system had been on a 30-day maintenance refresh cycle performed manually by human technicians. The ship spent 6 hours in a dead drift while the route was recalculated by hand. Nobody was hurt. The incident report used the word anomaly 4 times and the phrase operational review pending twice. Wu Jin read the incident report from his desk on Earth. He filed it without comment. On day 28, Fleet Admiral Hyan authorized a repositioning of Earth's patrol fleets. 3 carrier groups moved from their standard stations near Council-adjacent space. They moved away, deeper into human-settled territory, away from Council trade lanes, away from the border monitoring positions Earth's fleet had held for 30 years as part of a mutual security arrangement that the Council had always called a partnership and which Hyan had always called something else. Varric staff analyst noticed the repositioning at 2 a.m. and woke Varric. The analyst expected Varric to be alarmed that the human fleet was moving toward Council space. It took Varric 4 minutes to understand that the fleet was not moving toward anything. It was moving away. Not posturing. Not threatening. Withdrawing. Orienting inward. Turning its back on Council space the way you turn your back on something you've decided you no longer need to watch. That was the part that made Varric sit down. He could prepare for a species that wanted to fight. He had no protocol for a species that had simply decided the fight was not worth having, and meant it. He sat in the dark for a long time. Outside, 41 species were sending emergency messages into human channels. The human channels were on standard operation. Standard operation, right now, meant read receipts only. On day 31, Varric finally read the statement. He had not read it in the hall. He had not read it in the days after. His staff had read it and summarized it, and he had read the summary, and the summary had said something like formal reclassification notice, procedural in nature, legal review ongoing. He had accepted that. He was not sure now why he had accepted that. Maybe he had not wanted to know. Maybe knowing would have required him to move faster than he was ready to move. He read it now, alone, at his desk, on a printed copy that his assistant had placed in front of him without saying anything. The statement was exactly 11 words. Earth formally reclassifies its status to external observer, non-obligated, effective immediately. That was it. No rage in it.
No accusations.
No list of grievances. Just a procedural sentence written in the Council's own legal language, citing a classification code that existed in the Council's own foundational charter, a code written 600 years ago for the controlled dissolution of failing colonies, code that nobody had ever used voluntarily, code that had been sitting in the charter like a door with no handle that everyone assumed was just part of the wall. ARA had found the handle. External observer, non-obligated. What it meant in practical terms was very simple. Earth was no longer a member participant. Earth was no longer bound by Council resolutions, trade frameworks, mutual defense agreements, or procedural obligations. Earth could not be sanctioned. Earth could not be compelled to appear before arbitration. Earth owed the Council nothing, not response times, not consultation, not cooperation, and all of it was completely, perfectly, maddeningly legal. And they were still watching. That was the part that sat wrong in Varric's chest. External observer. Not gone. Not hostile. Just watching, the way a person watches something from outside a window that they used to be inside. The emergency assembly had been running for 6 days. 300 delegates, 41 species, and the loudest room in council history, and none of it had produced a single thing that mattered. Some species were furious at Earth. Some were furious at the council. Some had gone very quiet and were doing the kind of math that quiet species do when they suddenly need to know what things cost. Varric held the floor. He delivered his assessment in the measured, sorrowful tone of a man who had practiced it. He spoke of humanity's immaturity as a galactic civilization. Their short history, barely 3 centuries as a spacefaring species, barely 40 years as council members. He spoke of ingratitude, of impulsiveness, of the damage to council stability caused by one species making unilateral decisions. His words were careful and his sentences were long, and none of them answered the question that Delegate Soren had asked quietly on the second day of the assembly and had not gotten an answer to. Has anyone reviewed the infrastructure dependency report? Soren asked it again on day 6. In the same quiet voice. To the same result. Varric moved to adjourn. That was when the transmission arrived. It came from Nari. It was not addressed to the council. It was not addressed to anyone. It was filed directly into the public galactic archive. Open access, all species, council members, and non-members both. The filing notification went to every registered delegate terminal simultaneously, mid-session, like a message slid under a door that was pretending to be locked. It was a data file from the debris field at Kepler's Reach. The colony on Kepler's Reach had gone silent 14 months ago. The distress call had come in at 12:04 p.m. on a session day. The council's standard recess had begun at 12 p.m. The emergency co-signature protocol had a 20-minute notification window. The window had closed at 12:20. The session had resumed at 12:47. The signal from Kepler's Reach had stopped transmitting at 12:31. Nari had gone to the debris field herself. Nobody had gone before her. The council's incident review had been conducted remotely, using the last automated sensor reports, which showed nothing because the sensors had been part of what stopped transmitting at 12:31. She had gone with a small ship and a 2-person crew, and she had spent 4 days in the debris field. She had found the colony's emergency data recorder, a black box the size of a boot, designed to survive the kind of thing that had happened to Kepler's Reach. The recorder was in the archive now. The distress call was in the archive. The timestamp was in the archive. The math did itself. The assembly went very quiet. Not the quiet of people saying nothing. The quiet of people understanding something they could not even understand. The recording did not need explanation. It did not have explanation. It was timestamps and a voice and 17 minutes between the moment a colony administrator said the words, "This is a formal distress call," and the moment the signal stopped. 17 minutes in which the council was having lunch. Varric said something. Nobody remembered what. The words that followed him out of that moment did not stick. What stuck was Soren standing up. He did not shout. Thalari did not shout. But he was standing, which was already more than most people in the room had ever seen him do in a session. He said, "The dependency report should be read into the record. All of it." He sat down. It was read. It took 40 minutes. Every system. Every contract. Every corridor and station and calibration process and translation matrix. Every piece of council infrastructure running on human labor that the council had never reviewed because it had never needed to review it because humans had never stopped doing it. By minute 20, the assembly had gone from quiet to the specific, airless stillness of a room where everyone is doing arithmetic and nobody likes their answer. Before the session closed, a small species called the Ven, barely a century into galactic membership, 6 delegates, 1 small colony system, called for an internal vote. The motion, request human diplomatic engagement directly, outside council framework. The vote, 7-0. The Ven delegate filed the request before the session was formally adjourned. There was no rule against it. There had never needed to be a rule against it because nobody had ever done it. It was the first. Nari was still in the debris field when the vote came through. She read the result on a small screen in a very cold ship. She did not celebrate. She thought about the voice on the recording. The colony administrator who had said, "This is a formal distress call," in a careful, steady voice, the kind of voice people use when they are trying very hard not to sound scared. She had met him once, on a routine site visit. He had made her terrible coffee. She turned the ship around. There was work to do. The delegation arrived on a Tuesday. There were 5 of them, 3 senior council attachés, 1 communications officer, and a protocol specialist who carried a case of gifts that nobody on Earth had asked for. They came on a council diplomatic vessel, mid-sized, polished, flying the standard council approach signal that human orbital control had been reading for 40 years. They docked without incident. The receiving platform was clean and well-lit and staffed by humans who smiled and offered them refreshments and showed them to a comfortable waiting room with good chairs and a large window looking out at Earth's northern coast. The gifts stayed in their case. Nobody asked about them. Varric had not come. He had sent people instead, which told ARA something about how confident he was, and she had not needed to be told. She had guessed it the moment the delegation roster came through. He was not ready to sit across from her yet. He needed to know what the room felt like first. He needed to know if she was angry. Angry was something Varric knew how to work with. He had been managing angry species for decades. Wu Jin walked in at the scheduled time. He sat across from the lead attaché, a tall Thalari named Drev, and he said good morning, and he listened. Drev spoke for a long time. The proposal was structured in 3 parts: a restoration of Earth's full member participant status, a formal acknowledgement of the Kepler's reach data and an amendment to emergency session protocol, and a seat on the second-tier arbitration panel with expanded colonial representation rights. It was delivered smoothly and professionally. Drev had rehearsed it. Every pause landed where it was supposed to land. Wu Jin listened to the whole thing without moving. He thanked Drev. He said Earth would review the proposal. He asked if they wanted more tea. They did not want more tea, but 2 of them accepted anyway because the room was slightly cooler than comfortable and the tea was very good. The delegation waited. Day 1 passed. Day 2. Day 3. The waiting room remained available to them. The staff remained courteous. Nobody rushed them. Nobody avoided them. Every morning a fresh round of refreshments appeared. It was the most comfortable 3 days of professional humiliation Drev had ever experienced. On day 4, Wu Jin sent a document. It was 43 pages. It was written in the Council's own legal language, the same dry procedural style the Council had used for 6 centuries, not a word out of place, not a clause that didn't have a corresponding reference in the existing charter. Wu Jin had not written it alone. 11 people had worked on it for 4 months, quietly, with no announcements. The counter conditions were not punitive. That was the first thing Drev noticed, and it was the thing that made him read the whole document before calling back to Varric's office. He had expected demands. He had expected the kind of list that angry species produced, emotionally satisfying, legally complicated, designed to be argued down. This was not that. It was structural. A complete renegotiation of humanity's position in Council framework. First-tier arbitration, the same table as the Thalari and the Dravian bloc, no columns in the way. Full colonial sovereignty over defense requests, with a mandatory Council response window of 72 hours, legally binding, with an automatic escalation protocol that bypassed committee review entirely in crisis conditions. Joint maintenance credit for all infrastructure Earth operated on behalf of Council systems. Formal acknowledgement in the Charter that the work was being done and by whom. Equal vote weight on all resource allocation decisions affecting human-settled space. Nothing in it was about punishment. Everything in it was about acknowledgement. 40 years of being sat behind a column, written out in formal language at 43 pages, and the ask was simply, stop pretending we are not holding things up. Varric's response came within the hour after Drev reported back. It called the terms destabilizing. It called them unprecedented. It said the proposed changes would require a full charter review that the Council was not positioned to undertake at this time. It used the phrase an affront to establish Council tradition in the second paragraph, and Wu Jin read that particular phrase 3 times. He set the response on his desk. He put his tea next to it. He looked at them both for a moment. Then he sent one line back, Earth's counter conditions remain as filed. We are available to continue discussion at your convenience. That was all. 3 more species filed requests for direct human diplomatic engagement that week. Not through the Council. Instead of the Council. The Venn request had opened a door that apparently a number of smaller species had been standing next to for quite some time. Hands up, unsure if knocking was allowed. It was allowed. It had always been allowed. The Council had simply made it feel like it wasn't. Earth accepted all 3 requests and scheduled initial contact sessions without informing the Council first. Varric sent a second delegation on day 11. Smaller this time. 1 person. Soren arrived without formal credentials. He carried nothing. He had asked Varric's office not to announce his visit, and they had agreed because Varric had quietly authorized it and then put nothing in the official log. Soren had been the only council member who had voted against tabling the colonial defense petition, not loudly, not publicly, but in the formal record it was there, a single dissenting note that had been sitting in the archive for 18 months doing nothing. He sat across from ARA in a small room on the platform. Not the formal meeting room. A side room with 2 chairs and a table and no recording equipment, which ARA had checked before he arrived. He spoke for 12 minutes without stopping.
Ara listanat.
She asked 2 questions. He answered them. She looked out the window for a moment, at the coast, at the grey water. Then she looked back at him. She reached into her jacket pocket. She put the pen on the table. Soren looked at the pen. He understood what it meant. He nodded once. He left before dinner. That night, 6 more direct engagement requests came in from non-council species in the outer systems. Nari sent ARA a count, 14 total now, in 11 days. Wu Jin read the number from his desk. He picked up his tea. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. The table had been moved. Nobody announced it. There was no memo, no session note, no procedural notice filed about it. When the Hall of Concord opened on the morning of the formal re-engagement session, Humanity's table was in the first tier, center position, directly facing the main floor with a clear sightline to every seat in the hall. No column.
No abstraction.
No leaning required. It had simply been done. ARA walked in at the 9th bell, same as always. She looked at the table once. She did not stop walking. She sat down, placed her pen on the table, and looked at the hall. 300 delegates. The same hall. The same recycled air. The same curved rows going back into the high gallery. Everything the same except for where she was sitting, and where she was sitting changed everything about what the room looked like. Nari sat to her left. She was looking at the room the same way she looked at it every time, taking it in, storing it, adding it to something she kept track of in some private part of herself. Her jaw was not tight today. Wu Jin stood 3 steps behind ARA, which was exactly where he always was. Varric opened the session. He did not congratulate anyone. He did not read procedural updates at length. He opened with a formal statement acknowledging the filing of Earth's counter conditions and the Council's decision to proceed with structured negotiation on all 43 pages. His voice was the same as it always was, smooth, controlled, carrying no weather in it. But there was a quality to the smoothness now that had not been there before. It was the sound of a very large, very old machine that had learned it was not the only machine in the room. The framework negotiation went in stages. Each stage was a vote. Varric's office had spent 3 weeks going through the 43 pages and building a voting structure designed to pass the parts they could accept quickly and delay the parts they couldn't. Wu Jin had anticipated this. He had built the document so that the parts they would try to delay were structurally dependent on the parts they wanted to pass, and every delegate who had read it carefully, which turned out to be more of them than Varric had expected, could see exactly how the dependencies worked. The first-tier arbitration vote passed on the first round. Varric's block abstained, which was not a no but was also not a yes, and abstentions did not block passage. The Colonial Defense Response Window, 72 hours, legally binding, automatic escalation, passed on the second round, with 2 amendments that Nari reviewed in real time and cleared with a look at ARA before ARA nodded. The Joint Maintenance Credit provision required 3 rounds. Varric's bloc voted against it twice. On the third vote, 6 delegates from his own coalition crossed over, and it passed. ARA voted in every round. She did not speak except when the floor was formally offered to her, and when it was, she was brief.
No speeches.
No references to Kepler's reach. She did not need to reference Kepler's reach. It was already in the room. It had been in every room since the data file went into the public archive. It lived in the council now like a scar that people looked at without naming. The session ran for 4 hours and 20 minutes. When it was done, ARA sat for a moment. She did not feel triumph. Triumph was a clean feeling, and this was not clean. This was the specific, bone-tired relief of something being finally finished. Not achieved, not won, but finished. The way you feel when a very long argument is over, not because someone won, but because everyone simply ran out of energy to keep pretending the problem wasn't real. She thought about Kepler's reach. Not about the data file, not about the archive, not about the way the assembly had gone quiet when the timestamp math became clear. She thought about a routine site visit 2 years ago, and a colony administrator who had made terrible coffee in a small break room at the edge of a survey station, and who had complained about the humidity in the atmospheric processes, and who had been, in the small uncomplicated way of people who are just doing their work in a far-off place, completely alive. She did not say anything about this. She picked up her pen. She signed the new framework documentation where indicated. 7 signatures, different sections, the pen moving through each one at normal speed, not ceremonially, not slowly. The pen went back in her pocket. Most delegates were filing out. Staff collected documents. The hall made the shuffling, low-voiced noise of a large space emptying. Varric crossed the floor toward the exit, and his route took him near ARA's table. He stopped. He did not apologize. Thalari did not apologize in direct language. It was a cultural fact, not an excuse, and ARA had known it for 11 years. What he did instead was stand at the edge of her table and speak in a low, even voice for approximately 45 seconds. He said something that did not contain the words "I am sorry." It contained, in the dry and careful language of a man who had been managing institutions longer than she had been alive, a full acknowledgement of what had been missed and how long it had been missed and what that missing had cost. It did not have the shape of an apology. It had the weight of one. ARA listened to the whole thing. She said, "Thank you, Archdiplomat." Varric left. Nari waited until he was gone. Then she stood up and walked to the far side of the hall, to the left wing, 3rd tier, and she stood in the spot where their table used to be. The column was still there. It had not moved and would not move. It was a structural column. It held the ceiling up. It was doing its job fine. It just wasn't blocking anything important anymore. She stood there for a moment. She was not sure why. She just needed to stand in the place and feel the difference between standing in it now and what it had been. She called Hyan. He picked up on the 2nd ring. She said, "You can stand the fleet down to standard rotation." Hyan said, "Did it 3 days ago." She had not known that. She stood in the empty hall and held the phone and thought about what it meant, that he had already moved the fleet back before the session, before the votes, before the signatures. He had looked at the shape of the thing and seen where it was going and moved accordingly, quietly, without being asked, the way Hyan always moved. She thought about Wujing's tea going cold. She thought about the document that had taken 11 people 4 months to write. She thought about Nari not smiling in that hall for 11 years. She smiled now, just barely, in the empty hall, alone, with nobody watching. The column threw a shadow across the old 3rd tier spot where their table used to be. The shadow reached all the way to the aisle. It had always been a long shadow. She walked out of it and did not look back.